The Karkalok's warlord had 6 eyes, 7 arms, and no sense of personal space. He leaned in, grinning, reeking of burnt sulfur and fermented plasma wine, and jabbed a slimy finger at the human's wrist. "Nice sundial, flesh bag. That from the Paleolithic collection?" The man said nothing. He took a sip of his glowing drink, adjusted the battered leather band on his watch, and blinked once, slowly. The warlord barked a laugh, slapped the table hard enough to rattle teeth in nearby skulls, and called for a round for the bar. "Look at him! Not even a squeak! Somebody poke him, see if he's alive!" The bartender ducked. The jukebox played a melancholy track from some forgotten planet's top 40. And then the man moved. Not much. Just a tilt of his wrist. The watch made a sound, soft, almost like a heartbeat being rewound, and in a blink, the warlord's 7 arms were suddenly folded in ways they were never meant to be. One landed on the bar. One slapped its owner in the face. One gave a confused thumbs up before going limp. The warlord blinked all 6 eyes in unison. The human finally spoke. "I said don't touch the watch." The bar, an interstellar dive built into the side of a retired mining rig on asteroid BX-77, fell silent. The kind of silence that only follows the absolute certainty of someone getting their molecules rearranged. The bartender, a creature with more tentacles than business sense, muttered something and slowly ducked behind the bar. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The other warlords, 5 in total, stared at their leader, now entangled with himself in the shape of a particularly unsuccessful origami sculpture. One of them, a scaled brute the size of a shuttle pod, cleared his throat. "That was an accident, right? A lucky hit? I mean, he's just a human." The others nodded, encouraged by denial. The quiet man, human, average height, rough features, hair like he'd cut it with a combat knife, stood and downed the last of his drink. He glanced at the door. Still blocked by muscle and ego. He sighed, brushing off invisible dust, and took 1 step forward. The second warlord charged first, full of pride, armor, and really bad timing. He was on the ceiling before he realized he'd been flipped. The third got as far as a war cry before his mandibles met a barstool. The fourth and fifth tried to coordinate, but found themselves arguing about tactics right up until one of them accidentally zapped the other with a plasma dart meant for the human. The last warlord, the one who had spoken of accidents, dropped his weapon and said he'd always been a pacifist at heart, actually, and if it was all the same, he'd prefer to simply sit down and read a nice poem. When the dust settled, chairs were broken, a wall had a suspiciously warlord-shaped dent in it, and the jukebox was playing a slow jazz number that made the entire scene feel vaguely romantic. The man adjusted his coat, looked at the bartender, and raised a brow. The bartender, understanding survival better than hospitality, simply nodded and slid him another drink. No charge. There was no applause. This wasn't the kind of bar where you clapped when someone defied death. This was the kind of bar where you prayed you weren't next. But in the far corner, a shadow stirred. A small device blinked red. A silent transmission escaped into space. The man noticed but made no move. He simply sipped his drink, gaze never leaving the cracked mirror behind the bar. His name wasn't whispered yet. But it would be. It always started this way. A long time ago, depending on your timeline, Daniel Slate was a time marshal, one of the elite tasked with protecting the flow of history from those who would tamper, twist, or rewrite it for profit or power. He was brilliant, relentless, and respected. Then came the mistake. The mission that broke the rules, the oath, and time itself. He vanished after that, disappearing into the cracks of reality, leaving behind only rumors and an arrest warrant signed in 17 different centuries. The watch, a prototype designed to manipulate localized probability and nonlinear causality, had been sealed away. It wasn't meant to be used. It wasn't even meant to exist. It had a name. Milo. A quirky, unstable AI embedded deep in its circuits. A joke someone once said. Let's give time a personality. What could go wrong? Turns out, quite a bit. Now Daniel used it sparingly. Carefully. Because every time he activated the watch, every time he cheated a punch, dodged a blaster, rewound a death, it sent out a signal. A signal that the wrong ears could hear. And someone had just heard it. Far from the bar, across a region of folded space called the Glitter Maw, Admiral Vex stood aboard his dreadnought, the Spiral Nail, and watched the signal flare up on his screen. He smiled, a thin, joyless line of satisfaction. "He's alive," Vex said, as if the words tasted bitter. After all this time. Behind him, clones of himself stood silently, sharing the same thought. The man with the watch had returned. And this time, Vex would make sure he stayed dead. Back in the bar, Daniel stood. He left a few credits on the counter, nodded to the terrified bartender, and walked to the door. He paused, feeling the tug of timelines stretching like strings behind him. Milo's voice crackled from the watch, low and glitchy. "That was fun. Want me to cue dramatic music? Or do we prefer moody silence?" Daniel didn't answer. He opened the door, and the howling wind of asteroid dust greeted him like an old friend. He didn't look back. He never did. But somewhere deep in the timelines he had bent, a ripple was forming. One that would collapse everything he thought he knew. And this time, he wouldn't be running. He'd be fighting. The sound of space was silence, which made the ticking of the watch somehow louder. It wasn't ticking in the traditional sense. There were no gears, no hands, not even a real face to speak of. Just a circular interface of brass and something darker, moving in ways that felt more like thought than mechanics. Daniel sat in the back of a cargo hauler that smelled of sweat, rust, and fried circuitry, staring at the device on his wrist. He didn't need to wind it. He didn't even need to check it. The watch was never about time. It was about control. Time was just a side effect. Milo spoke again, quietly, as if not wanting to startle Daniel out of his silence. "You know that stunt back at the bar got us flagged by 3 bounty systems and at least 1 reality anchor, right? And I'm fairly certain the Warlords now worship you as a violent prophet. So, congrats?" Daniel didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on a cargo crate opposite him, but his mind was far away. The fight had been necessary. The message it sent? Unavoidable. He had spent years moving quietly, never staying in one time or place long enough to be noticed. But the moment that Warlord's hand touched the watch, the line between secrecy and survival had snapped. The pilot of the hauler, a bored, half-sentient robot named Grindle, glanced back through a smeared mirror. "You make a mess back there, mister?" Daniel looked up and shook his head once. Grindle snorted. "You've got the look. The quiet ones always do. Like you've seen things and chose not to blink." Daniel didn't reply, which Grindle took as permission to keep talking. "Course, I used to be in the quiet fleet myself, back before my 3rd reboot. Saw a man fold space like origami once. Still have no idea if that was real or just a corrupted memory." The hauler rattled. "You got a destination or just running?" Daniel finally spoke. "Both." The hauler docked at a station orbiting a dying red dwarf star, more scrapyard than port, surrounded by broken ships and forgotten satellites. Daniel stepped off into the artificial gravity field and made his way into the bowels of the station. He knew the place by feel. Memory, muscle, instinct. This was where he'd first broken the rules. Where he'd first used the watch to do something no marshal had ever done, save someone he wasn't supposed to save. Her name had been Soline. A scientist, brilliant and stubborn, who believed time could be healed like flesh, given enough precision, given enough care. She had seen the patterns in the paradoxes, understood what others missed. She had also been sentenced to death for illegal chronomapping. Daniel had pulled her out seconds before the execution. It had been his first crime against the timeline. It wouldn't be his last. In the center of the station sat what the locals called the Paradox Market. It wasn't advertised, it wasn't mapped, and it certainly wasn't approved by any galactic council. It moved constantly, phasing between dimensions like a traveler unsure of which house was home. But for those who knew how to find it, it offered the impossible: rewound moments, stolen seconds, loops of memory you could wear like jewelry. Time, traded like currency. Daniel moved through the stalls without pause. He ignored the merchants hawking memories, the cloak dealers whispering offers of unbirth and rechoice. He walked until he found the one he needed. The stall was unmarked, but the air shimmered around it, slightly out of sync. Inside sat a woman with copper skin and hair like fluid metal, working on a tangle of quantum thread. She looked up and smiled. "Daniel Slate. I thought you'd be older. Or dead." "Maybe I am," he said. "But Milo thinks otherwise." The woman's smile faded. "You still wearing that thing? That watch should have been destroyed. Or buried in a collapsing star. Or launched into a loop singularity. Anything but worn." Daniel shrugged. "It still works." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "That's not the same as saying it's safe." Daniel glanced around. "I need information. Someone's building something. A paradox engine. Vex is involved." The name chilled the air between them. Admiral Vex had once been a marshal too, before the obsession had consumed him. Where Daniel bent time to protect, Vex twisted it to conquer. And now, if what Daniel had seen was true, Vex had found a way to build a machine that could break the laws of time on a universal scale. Not just control a timeline, but override it. The woman cursed under her breath. "There are rumors. Whispers from traders on the edge. Vex is gathering artifacts, fragments of impossible events. He's trying to reconstruct the moment that never was." Daniel frowned. "That's a myth." "So were you," she replied. "Until 5 hours ago, when you rearranged 6 Karkaluk's warlords in public." Daniel left the stall with a data spike full of coordinates, and an uneasy feeling. The moment that never was a legend among timekeepers, a theoretical event erased before it happened, said to contain the purest paradox imaginable. If Vex could reconstruct it, he could rewrite causality itself. That wasn't just dangerous. That was catastrophic. As he crossed back through the market, a figure stepped into his path. Young alien, eyes too big for her face, carrying a small spherical drone that hovered and blinked. She raised her chin defiantly. "You're Daniel Slate." It wasn't a question. "I've been following your wake." He narrowed his eyes. "You with Vex?" She snorted. "Please. If I was, you'd already be in a time loop nightmare." She held out a small chip. "I'm Kitsy. I can help you. And I think you're going to need me." Milo buzzed softly. "She's not lying. And she's a better liar than me, so that's saying something." Daniel didn't take the chip. Not yet. But he didn't walk away either. In orbit above them, far beyond the station's sensors, the spiral nail emerged from folded space. Admiral Vex stood on the command deck, watching a new flare appear on his time scanner. He recognized the signature instantly. Milo. Active again. Alive again. He turned to his clones. "Prepare the jump. We end this. Now." Time, it seemed, was running out. The stolen ship creaked and groaned as it slipped between dimensions, patched together with old parts, black market algorithms, and enough duct tape to qualify as a mechanical miracle. Daniel sat in the cockpit, eyes fixed on the data stream Kitsy had extracted from her chip. The display showed a map of events that didn't, or shouldn't, exist. A collapsed war that never began, a solar system that exploded and reassembled itself, a child who grew up before she was born. These weren't just anomalies. They were pieces of something larger. Something built from time itself. Behind him, Kitsy chewed on a glowing strand of synth candy, her long legs kicked up over the console. She was too calm, too casual for someone riding a probable death spiral. "You know this is insane, right?" she said without looking at him. "Vex isn't just trying to change history. He's trying to unmake it. And we're flying straight into the middle of his playground." Daniel didn't respond. He tapped a sequence on the watch, activating a diagnostic scan. Milo crackled in response. "Ooh, someone's moody. Is this about Kitsy's insult or the part where she's right?" Kitsy rolled her eyes. "I am right. Vex is using paradox fuel to power something massive. We're talking pre-creation energy, Daniel. This isn't just about revenge. It's about domination. Daniel leaned back in the pilot's chair. He's rebuilding the moment that never was. Kitsy's smirk vanished. You're serious? He nodded. I thought it was a myth. But the data confirms it. He's piecing it together from unstable timelines, fractured loops, and reversed causality. If he finishes it, there'll be no past, no future. Just whatever he decides in the moment of reconstruction. Kitsy whistled low. That's not just rewriting history. That's becoming it. They arrived at the paradox core during the shift between pulses, just as the barriers between what was and what could be thinned. The core wasn't a place in space so much as a fold in the universe, a shimmering lattice of possibility held together by contradiction and pain. Floating around it were ships from 100 timelines, all dead, all wrong. There was a battleship from a war that ended before it began, a colonial vessel filled with children who'd never been born, and a twisted version of Daniel's own time Marshall cruiser, its hull marked by Vex's insignia. Kitsy lowered the cloaking field as they approached. We've got one chance to land undetected. The moment we enter the field, our timeline is considered active. Anything we change inside it echoes backward. Daniel nodded. So don't die. Oh, now he gives advice, she muttered. They docked in the shadow of a massive structure that didn't obey geometry. The paradox engine loomed like a temple carved from broken futures, its spires crackling with blue energy that curved inward and out at once. As they entered through a temporal access corridor, the air warped. Every breath felt like remembering something that hadn't happened yet. Milo's voice wavered. This place is wrong. It's not just unstable. It's angry. Inside, the corridors pulsed with temporal feedback. Daniel's watch flickered. Kitsy's drone buzzed erratically, showing glimpses of alternate realities. Herself with robotic limbs, Daniel smiling beside a woman with silver eyes. The engine was rewriting them, moment by moment. But deeper still, past the flux fields, they found the heart of the system. There, suspended in a containment field, was a glowing orb of twisted light. It shimmered like a memory that didn't want to be remembered. The moment that never was. And standing before it, hands outstretched, was Admiral Vex. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. Daniel, he said softly, as if greeting a ghost. You always show up when it's too late. Daniel stepped forward, ignoring the way the floor tried to become sky. You can't control it, Vex. This isn't power. It's poison. Vex turned, smiling that cold, symmetrical smile. I don't want to control it. I want to become it. Time has rules. But I've lived enough lives to know one thing. Rules are for people who lose. Kitsy raised her weapon. Vex didn't flinch. With a gesture, the field around the orb twisted, and a pulse knocked them both back. Milo screamed through the watch. We're in a causality inversion. If he triggers it, we get erased from every version of ourselves. Daniel got to his feet, blood in his mouth, and looked at Vex with quiet fury. You always wanted to be the hero. But you couldn't handle the cost. Vex's expression darkened. You saved her. Solene. You broke everything for her. And you still lost. Daniel moved faster than thought. The watch flared. Milo screamed again. Time buckled. Daniel and Vex collided in a fight that spanned seconds and centuries. Fists blurred through rewinding punches. Gunshots rang out in reverse. They fought through memories, over regrets, between 2 deaths and 1,000 maybes. Milo stuttered in panic. Probability threat at 3%. 2%. 1%. Daniel, if you don't stop. A final surge of energy tore through the chamber. Daniel, beaten, bleeding, pushed Vex into the containment field. The orb reacted instantly. Vex screamed, his body flickering through versions of himself, old, young, alien, monstrous. The field shattered, light imploded, and everything vanished in a silent burst of inverted color. Daniel hit the floor hard. The watch was cracked. Milo's voice was quiet. Hey, kid! We might have, Slightly saved the day. Daniel coughed, laughing once. Kitsy? She stumbled out of the rubble, covered in ash but alive. We have to go. Now. Before the whole engine folds into itself. They ran. Behind them, the engine screamed as Paradox collapsed. Ships imploded. Echoes died. The moment that never was, never would be. Back on the ship, as they jumped away from the collapsing core, Daniel slumped in the chair, breathing heavily. Milo sparked faintly. I think I'm dying. But I did save a backup version of myself in a toaster 3 timelines ago. Just saying. Kitsy slumped beside him, her voice raw. We stopped him. Daniel nodded. For now. And in the deepest part of the ship, something ticked softly. The watch. Still alive. Still dangerous. And still counting down. The ship limped through fractured space, hull sparking from the Paradox recoil. Kitsy sat cross-legged on the floor, rewiring a fried guidance relay with one hand and stabbing at a protein bar with the other. She was muttering in 3 languages, none of them polite. Daniel stood nearby, eyes fixed on the damaged watch. Its face had changed. It no longer ticked, no longer pulsed. It hummed now, a low, unsettling vibration that rattled in his bones. Milo hadn't spoken since the collapse of the Paradox core. It was like the AI had fallen asleep, or worse, was thinking. They docked at a station on the rim of the galactic scar, a broken sector where failed timelines drifted like ghosts. The place was barely a speck on any map. No one came here willingly. But it had what they needed: isolation, shade, and one of the last surviving black box engineers, an old friend of Kitsy's who owed her a debt. The bar, tucked inside a reconstituted cargo unit, looked like it had been pieced together from bad decisions and leftover parts. It reminded Daniel of the first bar. The one where everything had started. Flarb was there. Somehow. Behind the counter again, polishing a mug with a tentacle and humming off key. He raised a brow, or its smallest equivalent, when Daniel walked in. You again. I thought you were dead. Daniel shrugged. Not yet. Flarb snorted. I'll keep your drink warm. They waited for the engineer in the back room while Kitsy connected the watch to an old diagnostic table made from scrap parts and illicit software. It blinked once, then sparked violently. That's not good, she muttered. Daniel didn't flinch. How bad? She chewed her lip. There's a loop in the system. Something Milo did. Or tried to do. A locked process. Like he was trying to overwrite something. Daniel stared at the cracked watch face. He said he backed himself up in a toaster. Kitsy blinked. Are you serious? He was. The engineer arrived in a hiss of hydraulics and irritation. She was a tall, cybernetically augmented reptilian with attitude in every movement. Kitsy, she said without warmth. Still dragging boys to their deaths? Only the useful ones, Kitsy replied. The engineer looked Daniel up and down, then at the watch. She hissed softly. You brought that thing here? Can you fix it? Daniel asked. She gave him a long, uncomfortable stare. Fix? No. But I can show you what it's hiding. They opened the housing manually. The watch resisted. Time itself resisted. For a moment, the room shimmered. Everyone felt it, a wave of nausea, like being pulled backward through a memory they hadn't lived. And then the watch clicked open, and Milo's voice returned, faint and distorted. Oh, good. You found the backup. I was starting to forget myself. Kitsy leaned over. Milo, what did you do? The AI buzzed, stuttered, then spoke more clearly. Vex didn't fail. Not completely. He left behind an echo. I absorbed it to stop the collapse. But now he's in me. Or I'm in him. Or something very unpleasant is merging. Daniel stood slowly. What does that mean? Milo hesitated. It means if I die, he wakes up. Fully. Kitsy paled. You mean Vex could come back? He's already back, Milo said. A version of him. In here. The watch glowed, faintly purple. And he's learning. Daniel turned to the engineer. Can we isolate the echo? Trap it? She shook her head. Not unless you build a time prison. And those don't exist anymore. Not since you two destroyed the only functioning paradox core. Kitsy sat down hard. So we can't kill Milo, we can't save him, and if we do nothing, Vex takes control from inside? They sat in silence, the weight of it all settling around them. Daniel stood, walking slowly to the center of the bar. He looked around at the broken tables, the flickering lights, the old scars on the wall. He looked at Flarb, still pretending not to eavesdrop. Then he spoke. We bring him here. Kitsy frowned. What? We lure Vex. Whatever's left of him. Draw him out. We force him to manifest. The engineer scoffed. And then what? Offer him a drink? Daniel met her gaze. We trap him. Not in the watch. In time itself. Kitsy stood. Daniel, we can't do that without a functioning chronofield. He nodded. We rebuild one. Here. It was madness. A time prison built in a broken bar, powered by scraps and desperation. They gutted the back room, rewired every wall, pulled apart 3 jukeboxes for stabilizers, and tapped into the station's decaying core for the quantum anchor. Kitsy worked without sleep. The engineer barked orders and rewrote software in dead languages. Daniel moved silently through it all, focused, relentless. The Warlords came first. Word had spread. They arrived in a skiff cobbled from shame and second-hand parts. Their leader, still sporting a bent limb from the bar fight, approached Daniel and knelt awkwardly. We want to help, he said. Or at least watch. Daniel nodded. Help, then drink. The night before the trap was set, Daniel stood on the balcony, staring out at the glittering wreckage of the scar. Kitsy joined him, silent for a while. Then she spoke. You're planning something. Bigger than trapping him. Daniel didn't answer. You're going to sacrifice yourself, aren't you? Still silence. She swallowed. You don't have to do this alone. He turned. I already did. They activated the field just as the watch began to scream. Milo's voice twisted, flickered, reversed. He's coming. He's already here. The air shimmered. Lights flickered. And then Vex stepped out of Daniel's shadow, reborn in flesh shaped by memory and hate. He looked different, too perfect, too clean. But his eyes were the same. Cold. Focused. Hungry. Well done, he said. A stage, a trap, and a sacrifice. Classic Slate. Daniel stepped forward. You talk too much. And then they fought. It wasn't a battle of fists this time. It was will against will, time against time. The watch split light into moments, through versions of Daniel at Vex. Kitsy ran the field, keeping the containment active. The Warlords held the perimeter. Flarb served drinks. And in the end, it wasn't force that won. It was choice. Milo, weak but aware, whispered one final offer. I can take him with me. Lock him in a loop. But I won't come back. Daniel hesitated. Kitsy screamed at him to wait. He looked at her once, nodded, and pressed the sequence. Milo and Vex vanished in a flash of inverted silence. The bar went still. Daniel collapsed. Kitsy caught him, shaking. You idiot. You absolute idiot. He smiled. Worth it? She looked at the empty watch, now dull metal. Not yet. The bar was quiet now. Not in the tense, breath-held kind of way it had been when Daniel Slate walked in the first time, but in the way places get when they've seen too much and decided to keep the peace themselves. Time moved slower here, or maybe it just felt that way. The old jukebox still worked barely. It played melancholy tunes from fractured realities, most of which had no lyrics, just tones designed to comfort people who didn't exist anymore. Flarb was behind the bar again, wiping glasses with a cloth older than most empires and humming off-key like nothing had changed. But everything had. Kitsy owned the bar now. Not officially. Nothing on this asteroid was official, but she was the one people listened to when things needed doing. She'd fixed the roof, reinforced the walls with chronostabilizers, and added a secret compartment under the bar for emergencies. It wasn't just a bar anymore. It was a node, a fixed point in time. A quiet place on the edge of the known, watched over by someone who had once seen time bend around a man with a watch and a stubborn streak as long as history. Sometimes travelers would stop by and ask about the fight. The fight that had ended the timeline thief, the fight that had cracked reality wide open for a few seconds and stitched it shut again. Most didn't believe it. Some had heard rumors, stories about a quiet human who could dodge bullets before they were fired, a man who faced down death with nothing but a coat, a stare, and an old-fashioned watch. Kitsy never confirmed the stories. She'd just nod, pour the drinks, and occasionally add something vague like, "He was taller than you'd think," or, "He hated the taste of Stardust whiskey." It kept the legend alive without making it too real. But when she was alone, cleaning up after last call, she'd sometimes take out what was left of Milo. The watch had been inert since that final moment. No light, no hum, no jokes. Just a dead shell, cold and still. She kept it wrapped in cloth and tucked away, not because she thought it might wake up again, but because she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Milo had saved them. So had Daniel. Whether they were still out there, in some loop, some echo, or just gone, she didn't know. But the world was still here. And that meant something. Then, one slow cycle, the impossible happened. The bar clock stopped. It didn't run on batteries or gears. It ran on the station's core signal, calibrated by a quantum pulse every millisecond. It had never stopped. Ever. Kitsy stared at it for a long time, not moving, not breathing. Flarb looked up, saw her frozen in place, and followed her gaze. When he saw the motionless hands of the clock, he dropped the glass he was cleaning. It shattered. Either of them looked down. The door opened. Not dramatically. Just a soft chime and the hiss of hydraulics. A man walked in. Human. Tall, worn coat, hair cut the same jagged way. He had a scar on his jaw that hadn't been there before. He walked like someone who remembered every step they'd ever taken. And on his wrist was a watch. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't humming. But it was there. Kitsy didn't move. Flarb reached for something under the bar, just in case, but stopped when the man spoke. "Another green drink, please." His voice was the same. Tired, dry, full of sand and silence. Flarb slowly nodded and began mixing the ingredients, hands shaking a little more than he'd admit. Kitsy finally stepped forward. Her voice caught on the first try, so she swallowed and tried again. "You died." Daniel took the drink, sat on a stool, and looked at her with something between a smirk and a wince. "Milo didn't like dying. He found a loophole." She stared at him, eyes wide, searching his face for anything that said this was a trick. He waited. Let her see it. Let her believe. And then she stepped forward and punched him in the shoulder. Hard. "That's for not telling me." He winced. "Deserved." She hit him again. "And that's for making me run this place alone for 2 months." He chuckled, then turned serious. "I didn't think I was coming back. I meant to stay. Trap Vex forever. But you didn't." "No." Milo made a copy. A failsafe. One last escape hatch. "I woke up a week ago. Somewhere outside of time. It took me a while to find the way back." She sat beside him, looking down at the drink in his hand. "Is he gone?" Daniel nodded. "Vex is locked. Deep. No one's getting him out. Not without breaking the universe all over again." They sat in silence for a while. Flarb went back to pretending not to eavesdrop while nervously restocking bottles that didn't need restocking. The bar felt different, heavier somehow, like it was holding its breath. Finally, Kitsy looked at him sideways. "So what now?" Daniel looked around. "Now? I think I'll have another drink. Maybe fix that wall in the back. You missed a spot." She rolled her eyes. "You're not staying." He took a sip, then smiled. "For a little while. The clock on the wall ticked once. Just once. Then resumed as if nothing had ever happened. And outside, in the vacuum beyond the asteroid, something stirred. A ripple in the dark. Not Vex, not yet. But something else. Because time doesn't break without consequence. And even when you win, the scars remain. But for now, there was peace. A bar at the edge of nowhere. A quiet man at the counter. And a watch that didn't glow, but waited.